Hey, hello, morning everyone. I'm Ben. I'm part of the church here at Abbey, and this morning we are continuing our series on the Sermon on the Mount, because it turns out if the author of the universe and everything takes human form and turns up in your neighborhood and gives a TED talk, people really want to spend time thinking about what that says, even thousands of years later. So we're spending quite a lot of time going through the Sermon on the Mount quite closely. This morning we're in chapter 5, verses 27 to 30. And Chris, I'm going to have to point at you a lot because there's lots of these, I'm afraid. That means we're doing, what's the topic? Fun times. Yes, it's the lust one. Or maybe more accurately, if we go to the next one, maybe lust, maybe more like this. We'll say more about this later. Do you know cornflakes were invented because the Kellogg brothers were concerned that young men's appetites were getting too voracious and heated, and that's why they couldn't stop masturbating. And so they had to eat the blandest food possible to cool themselves down and get control of themselves. That's where cornflakes came from. We're going to try and not be cornflakes. Just going to say that right now. We'll maybe say a bit more about that later as we go through. But yeah, this bit of this series, I think, has been designated the scary one. This is the one nobody wanted to do. And I think that's right, actually. I think it is a bit of a scary one, not because it's cringe, not because you might have to say slightly awkward or embarrassing words like masturbation. We already got that one out of the way. Not because it's not very British to talk about this stuff. Like, I'm not too fussed about any of that side of it. But I do think it's a tricky one because there are just lots of duff ways to do it. There are lots of ways. Oh, that's good. We've got some people with dirty minds in. That's good to know. It's good to know I'm not the only one. Let's get that clear straight away. There's lots of duff ways to do this talk. I think it's quite a heightened sort of area of life, and everybody has different experiences. Everybody is so different, and different experiences, different histories, and I just feel very conscious that there are lots of ways, if you try and sort of make sweeping pronouncements in anything in this area, it's got a real risk of landing on people differently and in potentially harmful ways, to each of us and to the people that we interact with. So I do think it is quite a scary one, not because I'm worried about being embarrassed, but because I'm worried about accidentally doing harm or having this land on people more heavily than it should. So, to hopefully avoid those pitfalls, there's a few things I'm going to do, but it needs some of your quite active listening. I'm sorry about that this morning. Can't really zone out of this one. I'm just going to mostly try and say lots of those pitfalls out loud, and then I hope that can help us to notice if they're happening and maybe work together to address them. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do to try and avoid those pitfalls of the ways that this can land badly, the first thing I need you to know is we're not even going to try and do everything, right? 20 minutes is not enough time, you'll be shocked to know, to do a comprehensive Christian sexual ethic or anything like that. Okay, so I really want you to hear that what I'm saying this morning is not an attempt to bottom out this whole discussion area. I'm not going to try and come up with a picture or a formula that covers every possible situation. I'm just going to say a couple of small things that I feel sort of confident about in quite precise kind of parts of this whole massive potential topic. Okay, so please don't extrapolate these into like, well, Ben gave us the complete picture. We're not even going to try that, okay? This is not a comprehensive sexual ethic. This is just a couple of thoughts that I hope might be helpful. That's one thing we're going to do. Then I'm going to just give you some headlines, again, because of time, and I'm going to say 3 don'ts out loud, 3 things that I really don't want to have happen from this passage. And I'm going to give you 2 notes that I hope might help us to keep track of that. And then I'm going to finish with giving us one do. So 3 don'ts, 2 notes, 1 do. And yeah, genuinely, like, if you... There's lots more to unpack here than we have time to do. And don't be embarrassed. We've already said it, right? Let's not cringe. Let's not hide behind awkwardness. If you need to spend more time unpacking any of those, find somebody to talk to. You can come and grab me afterwards or whatever. Like, we're going to cover the headlines real quick, but there's plenty more we could talk about. Okay, so with all that big build-up and caveats and disclaimers out of the way, let's actually read the bit that we're looking at. But please don't panic. Don't have an immediate kind of like, oh my goodness, response. It's all right. We're going to get to those don'ts and those notes and that do. And there'll be time. There's time to have conversations outside. This isn't the only chance. It's not just these 15 minutes that I've got left now. There's more time that we can have to wrangle with some of this stuff. Okay, so let's read Matthew 5, 27 to 30. You have heard that it was said, do not commit adultery. But now I tell you, is he about to give us the all clear? Go for it. You've heard that it was said, do not commit adultery. But now I tell you, anyone who looks at a woman and wants to possess her is guilty of committing adultery with her in his heart. So if your right eye causes you to sin, take it out and throw it away. It is much better for you to lose a part of your body than to have your whole body thrown into hell. If your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It is much better for you to lose one of your limbs than to have your whole body go off to hell. Okay, now, if you're anything like me, let me just remind myself where I am. And you read that passage very quickly at face value, your first thought might be, well, we're doomed. We're screwed. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but if we're really saying that, if we're saying, if you even glance at somebody in a way where you feel some sort of pang of desire or attraction, then you already need to gouge your eye out, cut your hand off, and you're in danger of the fires of hell. You know, by the time I was 15, I'd have no body parts left, you know? Like, on the first read-through, if you just hit it like that, I don't know, what are you supposed to do? We're past redemption. What can we do? And that actually is one of my don'ts, one of the things I really want to make sure we don't end up hearing or taking away from this morning. And genuinely with these, like, if you find yourself slipping into these, or these thoughts starting to come up, or drifting towards these patterns, even as we're talking now, like, I don't mind if people shout out in the middle or afterwards or whatever, but if you find one of these 3 things, these are the 3 that I'm particularly concerned about, I suppose. If you feel them sort of starting to arise from looking at this passage or talking about it, say something. Like, please don't go home with the germ of one of these 3 things in your mind. Okay, so 3 things I really don't want us to do in response to that passage. I mean, this goes for pretty much any Bible passage, but I think it's particularly likely with this one. Number 1, I don't want us to do rushed reading. You see what I did there? This is going to sound like I'm joking. There's genuinely a bit of me that is worried that there might be somebody here this morning who hears that passage and goes, I am a person who wants to take God seriously, and Jesus says, then if my eye causes me to sin, I have to go and gouge it out. There's a bit of me that's worried that somebody might try that. You know, let me just be as clear as I possibly can. Please do not go home and gouge out any eyes or cut off any hands. Please do not do self-harm in response to that thing because you took it too literally. And if you're chuckling and going, oh, obviously he doesn't mean actually do that. Obviously we don't take that literally. As an aside, I think that raises lots of interesting questions about how we tackle the Bible, and why is it we're so sure that this bit must be just joking, and then there's other bits where we're like, oh no, but of course that one is, you can't mess with a single word or dot of that. But that's a different issue for a different day. But I really don't want us to hit this hard at face value, hear those big threatening words on a topic that, might feel close or vulnerable to some of us, and have a drastic reaction to it. I actually don't think this passage is even about, ultimately, what to do with your feelings of sexual desire, right? And we'll say a little bit more about that later. But there's definitely, we could rush through reading this and be like, oh my goodness, I'm in serious trouble, and kind of have that surface reaction to it and nothing more. I really don't want us to do that. Okay, so no rushed reading, please. Not on this, not on anything. The second thing I really don't want us to do, which is kind of related to that, I really don't want us to get into a purity panic, like a shame spiral of, maybe this is like a softer version. Maybe we're not going to go home and literally gouge out our eye, but we might go home and put our head in our hands and go, oh my goodness, but I messed that up all the time. I saw somebody in the shop the other day, and I noticed that they had a bum, and now I can't cope, and I'm a terrible person, and I need to spend my whole week eating nothing but cornflakes, and I've got to just get a hold on this. And then it happened again. Like the person from Tesco who delivered my cornflakes, they had a nice look in their eye. Oh no. And we get into this kind of spiral of, I can't perfectly cleanse every part of my being, right? And again, this doesn't just go for this passage. This might go for greed with money or selfishness in our attitudes, anywhere else. There's all kinds of things, but we can get into that sort of state where we're like, I can't get this out of me. I keep making the same mistake. I'm doomed. I'm screwed. I'm past help. And I really don't want us to get into that place. It would be really easy to do, right? There's a really easy preach on this where I make all or a good number of you feel incredibly guilty and shamed and like you can't help yourselves. And then we could introduce forgiveness from Jesus, hooray, as this kind of salve to all that guilt and shame that you're feeling. And then we go in this kind of endless cycle of, I'm a terrible person. Oh, okay, I've been balmed by singing that worship song. I'm a terrible person. It's so easy to do that. And I really don't want to do it. I really don't think it's true or it's helpful. And I'll say more about this as we go on. But I think actually the irony is that purity panic can put us in a place where we end up having more lustful intent in the broadest sense of the word. And it actually makes us less of a loving neighbor to other people. So I really don't want you to start getting in this spin of I can't fix this one. And the third thing I really don't want us to do is kind of the flip side of this. This might be my biggest one of all. I hate this. I really, really, really don't want us to get into subculture smugness. And what I mean by that is I think there's a risk with this. Maybe you're not that person. Maybe you've never noticed anyone's bum in a shop ever. Maybe you've never had this feeling. Maybe you are successfully sort of transcendent of any such base desires, and you walk through the world in a kind of beautiful aloofness. And I think there's a danger that we start ending up making this picture of we're the Christians. We're the good people in this building who don't do those things. None of that here. We're the good people who know that it's very bad to think lustful thoughts, but everyone out there, they're the bad people. They're the worst. They go around saying to each other, have you had a lustful thought today? Maybe you should have another one. They have these parties. I'm being slightly flippant, but I think there's a danger that we end up using this as a line of division for some sort of moral superiority, right? And we end up being we're the good Christians and they're the bad everyone else. And I hate that. I hate it so much. Anything where we make a little in club for ourselves where we think we're somehow exempt or different or above other people, just no thanks. So those are my 3 don'ts. Please don't rush through reading this and just get a superficial take on it. Please don't get yourself into a shame spiral panic that ends up doing more harm than good. And please don't turn this into an us versus them dividing line. 2 notes on the passage that I think might hopefully help with that, so it's not just me saying, please don't do that. 2 quick notes. First one, I mentioned this already. I really don't think this passage is ultimately about the moral issues themselves, not in this passage or any of the other ones, right? There's this whole string of things in chapter 5 in particular where Jesus is like, you've heard it said X, Y, Z, but I say to you something even more intense, right? And there's all these different moral issues that he kind of rattles through. I really, really don't think that the ultimate, primary, most important takeaway of those things is so sort out your behavior better on that particular moral issue one by one. I don't think it's Jesus coming down with like little patch note upgrades on the moral laws that you've got. Well, you thought that the lust deal was this, but actually you need to be more severe about it. I'm not saying that's not in there. I'm just saying I really don't think that's ultimately what these passages are talking about. And I think if you go away and you do a slow reading and you look at the whole thing and you consider it carefully, I'll be really surprised if you don't reach the same conclusion. I haven't got time to unpack it fully, but I just want to quickly touch on what I think is going on instead then. I think really part of what Jesus is doing in this whole sermon is saying, you're out here trying to draw these lines. You're out here trying to be like, well, the way to be moral, the way to be a good person, the way to be well behaved is to not commit adultery or to not get divorced, or, you know, you're kind of making these fine gradations in like what is okay behavior and what is not. But I am trying to paint you a picture of a whole different ballgame. The kingdom and the character that I'm talking about blows way past those things. You know, you think it's about whether you commit adultery or not, whether you do it twice or once, whether you get divorced in this context or in that context. I'm not talking about that. I'm trying to paint you a picture of a whole transformed world and character, a place where that won't even start to come up. But that doesn't mean that we are in that place now or we can live in that reality right here. But I think that this whole sermon, starts with the blessed are, right? Blessed are. You thought blessed were the rich. I'm telling you, blessed are the poor. You thought blessed are the big and powerful. I'm telling you, blessed are the meek. Then we get all these, you heard it said. You thought it was about this versus that. I'm telling you, it's a whole bigger picture. And then I think it's really interesting that, we talked about this a bit last week, if you keep going into chapter 6, at the end of all these sort of intense upgrades, Jesus says, you must be perfect like your Father in heaven is perfect. You must be perfect. And then in chapter 6, he says, don't worry. Do not worry about tomorrow. Do not worry about the clothes that you wear. Your Father knows that you need these things. So how does that work? If he's really here saying, you must worry harder, you must worry more. You thought you were okay with just not committing adultery, but I tell you, you've got to worry if you even think about it. Then why does he end in the next chapter with this whole thing on do not worry? I think there's something else going on in this whole sermon. So let's not just get stuck at the superficial thing of, I'm not chastising myself hard enough for my thoughts. And the second note on the passage, I think this is quite important, touched on it at the top. I think we hear it as lust. I used the Good News translation. The Bible you've got in front of you might have said, if you even look at a woman lustfully, right? The Good News, I really like its translation. It says, if you look at a woman to take possession of her. I think that's a good expansion of that word. Because I think we hear lust and we immediately think, like pink neon, sexy signs, sexy thoughts, pornography, rude things. But I think there's a bigger sense of lust, right? That passage is not just talking about sexual desire. And you can have lustful intent that has nothing to do with sexual desire, actually. There are ways to objectify people, to turn them into a possession, to want to be something that you take control of. There's nothing to do with just, do I feel a tingle in my pants. Right? There's ways of, there's all sorts of ways that we can end up turning a person into an object who is there solely to gratify our needs and wants and the things that we're concerned about. All right? And one of the ironies is, I think, that the purity panic stuff that I talked about earlier can actually end up doing that. And that's part of why I don't want us to get into that place. Is because that thing of like, but I still had that thought, that moment, that like pang of desire, right? And I can't get it out of myself and I can't stop, ends up creating another kind of lust and objectification and turning people into something we can't control. Oh, I don't know if I'm allowed to tell this story. Let's say it's hypothetical. Imagine that somebody reported one of their staff to HR and made them sit down with them and have a conversation because to say, you need to stop wearing those tight-fitting, high-neck jumpers to the office because I can't handle the way it makes me feel. There's so many things wrong with that, I don't even know where to start, right? But to me, that is a kind of lust. That is turning, right, in an attempt to get rid of, oh my goodness, I noticed someone's boobs once, right? In an attempt to get rid of that feeling, they have turned that person into an object who is only there for their possession, right? The only thing that this person can do in my life is make me feel a way I don't want to feel. So I have to change their world and their job and their career and their outfits because I don't know how to deal with this feeling. Like, that's your problem, my guy. That is not her problem. And so sometimes this purity panic can end up turning into another kind of lust where the people that we're looking at only exist in relation to what's going on for us. Do you know what I mean? You're not seeing that person as a whole person. You're not treating that person in the fullness of their humanity. They are just an obstacle, a stumbling block, an inconvenience to you, right? A stumbling block is not an object. It's not a person, it's an object. Anyway, so I like that translation, that looking at somebody to take possession of them. There are ways of doing that is nothing to do with sexual desire in and of itself. And we have to watch out that we're not turning one kind of lust avoidance into another kind of lust creation. Does that make sense? All right. 1, 2. Maybe we're going to get there just about without going too far over time. One thing I want you to do, again, this is not my fix-all for everything to do with sexual ethics forever. This is just one little bit of advice that I think is within reach that can be quite helpful, right? Let's keep it as small as it is. Before I give you my 1, 2, I'm going to tell you a quick story because I think it helps it lock it in my head at least. I was talking to a friend the other day. She was telling me that when she left her previous job, after quite a long time of working there and being quite senior in the team and a sort of respected manager, she had leaving due, as you do, and her boss got up and gave a speech to say some nice things about her time at the company. And he gave one piece of praise. His speech, he said one thing, and the one thing that he said was, she brought 2 great assets to this company. Making the gesture that you would expect. That's the one thing, after however many years and all the things that she'd brought and the person that she'd been in all that time, the only thing her boss could think of to say was a joke about her boobs. Now, I hope that you're all sitting there feeling appropriately mortified, right? It's so easy to think of all the ways he could have done better there, right? Like, there's so many ways that you could just not do that, right? And this is what I mean. We're not going to try and do everything. I'm not going to try and give you like the answer to everything, but here's something we can do to at least not be that guy, right? And at least not fall into that trap. And it's easy in that example to be like, well, just don't do that. Do better than that. But I think versions of that happen more often than we would like to admit to ourselves sometimes. I think that might be an extreme example, but that tendency of seeing somebody only in terms of them as a sexual object and not the fullness of who they are, I think if we were really honest and looked out for it, we'd be scared at how rife that is, how often that happens, maybe even subconsciously. Anyway, so that leads me on to my one thing that I think we can do, one positive action. Only a small one, not the whole thing. Might seem simple, but you can, believe it or not, work on treating and respecting people as the full, equal, precious fellow human that they are in all their humanness. You can just do that, all right? And I think there's a tendency with this stuff to get so fixated on that, but the feeling's still there. You know, I haven't excised that lustful thought. I still noticed my co-worker's boobs before I had to give a speech, and therefore I can't. I'm beyond help because I still had the feeling, the thought that still came into my head. Okay, but you can start on doing this independently of worrying about what comes into your head. Okay, so you don't have to have solved that whole thing. You don't have to have eradicated every last creeping glimmer of naughty thoughts ever coming into your head before you can start working on treating and respecting people as full, equal, precious fellow human beings. Okay, you can still have those momentary pangs that make you feel terrible or whatever. I sort of don't care. You can still work on interacting with the person in front of you in all of their fullness as a human being. There are so many other things about them. Think back to that story and that boss, right? There were so many ways he could have done that speech better. He didn't have to go there. That wasn't the only thing about that person. It sort of doesn't matter if he had that thought in the back of his head somewhere. I would rather he spent his time working out how he could have recognized and celebrated all those other things about the person in his team that made her who she was. And you can start working on that right now, no matter what. And it's about what you foreground, right? And I think there's a danger, again, with this like purity panic thing. If you spend all your time, I'm not just saying this hypothetically, right? I've been in these like somber men's breakfasts where you all sit around in chairs and like tell each other how guilty you feel about that video you watched last week. Oh my goodness, I'm awful, right? If you forever foreground that issue, all it does is reinforce it, right? If you spend all your time thinking about, did I have a lustful moment, it just concretizes other people as potential stumbling blocks, right? People with too great assets. It just locks in the question that that's the only thing that you can think about. It gives you tunnel vision. And actually, there are so many other things that you can foreground. You can just choose, you can just start foregrounding all those other things about people, right? You can engage with them on any other aspect of their full humanity. If you want to be really pious about it, you can start looking for what is it about them that tells you something about the character of God. What can you learn about goodness and holiness from this person? What is it in them that is, precious and beautiful in that way? But you don't even have to go there. Like, you can just like ask them what they had for breakfast or what they do in their spare time. Like, we can practice foregrounding people's full humanity. We don't have to stay locked in this tunnel vision world of some sort of guilty feeling. That's kind of my rant over. Sorry, I should keep going all day, and I said I would try not to. I think it's a very easy passage, this one, to have a very strong visceral reaction to, and then to start down all these sort of drastic paths that actually don't help. The question always, for me, with the words of Jesus is, how am I going to live in light of what this says about God and God's kingdom? How am I going to live in light of that now in a way that gets me ready for it? And I think choosing to foreground what is fully human about our neighbours, finding all the ways in which we can love and celebrate them, is a better way to get ready for the world that he is describing that is way past our petty moral concerns. I think that's a good way to get ready for it. So yeah, that's my one do. Let's do that. All right, I'm going to pray. Lord God, you know our hearts, but you also give us freedom to choose how to act and to be in this world. And I pray that you would help us to recognize the chances that we have to walk in line with your character, to celebrate the humanity of our neighbour, to build each other up as precious and loved children of God. Yeah, Lord, help us to foreground the things that speak of you. In Jesus' name.